Hi everyone, I'm Bob Paulinski, Master of Wine, back again today for another video. This one, the topic is going to cover one of the world's great wine regions, Saint Emilion. Now this video goes a little bit deeper into the wine geekdom. I think it's important in terms of telling the full story, but I promise to keep things moving along. Within this video, I'm going to talk a little bit about the region of Saint Emilion, what to expect from the wines, how the wines are classified, and then the video is going to conclude with a tasting of 3 different Saint Emilions, all at varying quality levels, with the final wine being one that is 25 years old. The region of Saint Emilion is the wine production hub of the right bank in Bordeaux. Within the larger region, there's also a town by the name of Saint Emilion. It's a medieval village of about 2,000 people. It's about a 1-hour drive east of Bordeaux. It's maybe 35 minutes by train. My recommendation is take the train. The train in Europe is fantastic, but the town itself is a stunning place with some of the best restaurants you'll find anywhere in the country. The region of Saint Emilion is quite large. Certainly it is in comparison to neighboring Pomerol. Saint Emilion is about 6 times larger than Pomerol. Now, unlike the left bank, most of the properties in Saint Emilion are very small. Most of the wine estates there are 10 hectares or about 25 acres or less in size. Neighboring Saint Emilion to the north are the so-called satellite districts of Saint Emilion. There are 4. These are some of the best values that you can find anywhere in Bordeaux. The wines are quite different than Saint Emilion proper, but they are very worthwhile, and in a future video, I'm going to cover them separately. In terms of what to expect from Saint Emilion, the majority of the wines are made up of a heavy percentage of Merlot. Generally, 60 to 80% of the blend will be Merlot. Cabernet Franc is the next most popular grape variety used. Cabernet Franc is a bit of a fickle grape variety there. It's treasured for a lot of the acidity and freshness and brightness it can bring to wines. But generally speaking, Cabernet Franc vines are not hitting their prime until about 20, 25 years old in the region. Now, Cabernet Sauvignon, which is the primary grape in the left bank, plays much more of a small supporting role in the right bank. Then you have Malbec and Petit Verdot, which again are used in very small percentages within Saint Emilion. Generally speaking, the wines from Saint Emilion are going to be more accessible at an earlier age versus the wines from the left bank. And one reason for that is the wines are primarily made up of Merlot. The wines will have a deep red fruit core character to them. They're very full, they're very soft. Oftentimes, Merlot will be harvested at slightly higher sugar levels than Cabernet Sauvignon, which that will result in is slightly higher alcohol levels, which gives the wine a little more body, a little more heft and substance. While the wines from Saint Emilion tend to be more accessible in their youth versus the wines from the left bank, it doesn't mean that Saint Emilion lacks longevity. There are many examples, especially with the better producers where the yields are low, there's very meticulous handling in terms of the wine production. These are wines that can go for decades. And just a brief word on tannin. Tannin is primarily derived from grape skins. Something like Cabernet Sauvignon is a very tiny berry, generally with thicker skins. Much of the tannin is being derived from the grape skins. It can also come from barrels and also the seeds as well, but generally it's coming from the skins itself. And it has a tactile impression on the palate, a bit of a drying impact. Sometimes it has a bit of a textural character, a bit of a gritty sort of, almost like a fine sandpapery feel on your palate. It's one of those elements that helps to give the wine longevity. Tannin, in terms of how it impacts your palate, is actually quite similar to tannin that you'll find in some types of tea, especially black tea, something like Earl Grey, for instance. That tannin is very similar to the tannin structure that you'll find in red wine. It's also worth noting that Saint Emilion is responsible for something called the garagistes. These are ultra small producers, generally wineries that are making a few hundred cases per year, ultra premium wines, the types of wines that'll make their way into a handful of Michelin star restaurants and perhaps find their way to some very affluent collectors. How are the wines classified? Well, this is where the wine geekdom piece comes into play. Back in 1855, the left bank created a classification that has remained largely unchanged since that time. Saint Emilion was not part of that classification. Fast forward 100 years later, in 1955, Saint Emilion created its own classification system. Now, that classification system is actually updated periodically over the years, which sounds great in terms of having something that is very current, but the system itself is loaded with angst and drama. The wines are segmented into one of many specific groupings. At the base level, this is Saint Emilion that is the most plentiful and the least expensive. Here's an example for the base level of Saint Emilion. Within this first group, the yields are higher than what you'll find with the other classifications of Saint Emilion. The wines will spend less time in oak, generally no new oak or very little new oak. The wines are released onto the marketplace fairly quick. Also, the wines are very straightforward and relatively short-lived. In late 2022, the latest reclassification was released. There are 200 plus properties that are designated as Appellation Saint Emilion Grand Cru. Here's an example of how that's noted on the label. To continue on, there are 71 properties that are listed as Saint Emilion Grand Cru Classe. There are an additional 12 properties that are listed as Saint Emilion Premier Cru Classe B, and 2 properties that are listed as Saint Emilion Premier Cru Classe A. Needless to say, this is a crazy convoluted system. It's actually led to some high-profile wine estates exiting the classification altogether. Recently, Chateau Cheval Blanc, Chateau Asson, Chateau Angelus, they've all opted out of the system altogether. There's always this politicking and chicanery going on behind the scenes. So it's a bit muddled. It's very confusing. I think this would be fertile ground for the next Netflix miniseries. But the bottom line is, it does provide some direction in terms of identifying those best estates. So in that sense, it does have some value. From left to right, we have Saint Emilion Grand Cru, Saint Emilion Grand Cru Classe. The first wine to be tasted is at the base level of Saint Emilion. Now, this isn't so much about the specific wine that I'm tasting, it's more about the general characteristics that you'll find within AOC Saint Emilion. The producer I have, this is a 2018 Chateau Franc Lemaine. This is 64% Merlot, 35% Cabernet Franc, and 1% of Cabernet Sauvignon. In terms of color density, it's not what I would say is an ultra extracted style of wine. It's a medium deep color. There certainly is some fade as you get out to the rim. In terms of the aromatics, rather muted. There is some red fruit. It does have a bit of that cassis characteristic to it. I'm not getting any overt aromas of oak, but overall a very direct but rather simple style aromatics. On the palate, it's really a continuation of what I picked up on the aroma. Simple, direct, fairly lean style, decent presence up front, falls off a bit on the back palate. Tannins are rather soft. This is a wine that has maybe another 4 or 5 years in it, but I don't see the real value in cellaring this wine. I think as it ages, those tertiary notes are going to come in, and the moderate level of red fruit character that's there is only going to fade. So this is a wine to drink now. Generally speaking, the price point for base level Saint Emilion is going to be in that sub $25 range in the US. Of course, in other markets around the world, prices will vary. The second wine is a Grand Cru. It's also a 2018 vintage. It's Chateau Haut Cadet. I bought this at Total for $29.99. The wine is made from 86% Merlot, 10% Cabernet Franc, 4% Cabernet Sauvignon, and it does get some time in new oak. In terms of the appearance, it's rather similar to the previous wine, maybe just a touch darker at the core. The aromatics have more intensity. There's more of that red fruit character. There's a bit more of the cassis plum note. You do get some of that smoky oak character, but certainly more intensity, more breadth, a bit more expansive in terms of aromatics. On the palate, this is much more of a complete wine versus the first. Rounder, weightier. It's got more of that nuance to it. The wine has just been opened. I think with a bit of airtime, this wine is actually going to open up and show more character, but very nicely made. It carries through to the back palate, good balance, and you can tell the oak quality is good. The oak is integrated well into the wine. Sometimes when poor oak is used, sometimes you'll get a very disjointed characteristic. With this, it's a seamlessly smooth character. Very well done. The third and final wine is a Grand Cru Classe. This is a tick above the wine I just tasted, and it would be a tick below the Grand Cru Classe B. What I have is a Chateau La Dominique. This is a 1998. You can see the fill level on this wine is very good. It's no more than a pinky width. Always check that with older bottles of wine. The fill levels can sometimes be compromised. When that happens, the wine can be at risk. So this is a very good indicator. This is a good sign. You can see the cork is in very sound condition. With this last wine, I shined a bright light through the bottle before opening it. There was very little sediment. I'm choosing not to decant this wine. I'm just going to pour it out of the bottle. But the appearance of it, it definitely does show some signs of age. There's a good amount of fade as you get out to the rim. That said, the color still does look healthy. The core is still relatively deep. And this color range is well within what I would say would be acceptable for a wine of this age. In terms of the aromatics, there still is some of that plum note. There's some red fruit. You certainly do pick up a good indication of oak. There's good intensity. The alcohol level on this wine shows 13%. And in today's world, that's actually not all that high for many red wines. This has no alcoholic heat to it. There's this subtlety. There's a very sublime sort of character in the aromatics. On the palate, wine's very nice. It's very round. There's not enough O's and smooth to describe this wine. There's good length, good structure to it. It has all those tertiary notes which you would expect. There's no hint of volatile acidity here. I think the wine is still actually holding together quite well. It may be at its peak, maybe just slightly over, but it's certainly holding together very well. This is a good indicator of what you can have in your cellar if you buy some of the current releases and hold on to them for 20 years or so. The wines age beautifully. Very happy with this wine. Going to be even happier drinking this later tonight. If you made it this far, please do hit the like button. Also subscribe if you haven't done so. I hope you're drinking something fantastic tonight. I think I'm going to be doing okay. Until next time, I'll see you somewhere out in the wine world. Cheers.